one moment you trust, the next minute you're dependable, or you're dependent, excuse me. You trust one minute, the next minute you're dependent on them, almost codependent. There's an inability to think on your own because you're so overcome with emotion. A lot of people struggle with the reality that relationships are not always what we think they are. There's a lot of people who don't want to believe that their family relationships aren't as positive as the world and social and cultural norms have told us that it is. I'm sure you checked onto this video, you clicked onto this video because in some way you believe that you can relate to this topic. In some way you feel that a relationship you've been in or a relationship with your family is extremely unhealthy. Traumatic bonding is the idea that you are going through intermittent periods of positive and negative, good and evil experiences with a particular person. In today's video, I'm going to tease and pull apart what this actually looks like, not only in a romantic relationship, but also in a family relationship. I'm Tamara Hill, and I am internationally and board certified as a trauma therapist. Let's jump in and get started on this topic. Anytime I have had to see a family for trauma, PTSD, complex PTSD, or some kind of family trauma that has caused relational issues within the family, the first thing I'm looking for is a repeated cycle of abuse and a repeated cycle of behaviors and thoughts and feelings that are being expressed within that family, because the reality is that a family operates as a system and a relationship operates as a system, right? You do something, they do something. It's a dance, right? It's like this back and forth dance. But when one person is dancing and doing all the movement while the other person is feeling betrayed and unloved and not cared for, then my question is this traumatic bonding that the person cannot walk away? There's intermittent harm that is also a partner to positive moments, right? So think of this, for example, traumatic bonding entails two individuals. Let's say your father is an abuser, and over the years you've been confused about who he is to you. You've been confused about what he wants in relationship to you because he's so up and down, right? Over the years, your father has been labile in mood. He's been wonderful one moment, ugly the next. He's been trustworthy one moment, deceptive the next. And now you've gotten to a place in your life where you realize most of your relationship with your father has been up and down, but you can't walk away. You don't feel like walking away is the answer, and you remain connected to him, no matter what. It's almost like a spiritual, psychological connection. You can't break away. Other people on the outside, however, may be asking you why, and you may find yourself having a hard time explaining why. Traumatic bonding really cements you to the relationship, and it keeps you from being able to step out. There are 7 stages to traumatic bonding, and if you haven't heard about them, here they are right here on the screen. There's trust and dependency, which is a stage that you most likely are going to experience, where up and down, right? And so it makes it really hard for you to believe your own thoughts, your own experiences. There's also a stage of resigning control. You just basically say, you know what? I'm giving up control. I don't get this relationship, and I don't think it's ever going to change. So I'm just going to learn to be okay with the way things are. And this stage is really a giving up stage. It's, I don't have the strength to fight, so therefore I'm just going to stay. The next stage is addiction to the ups and downs of the relationship, right? Remember that intermittent positive behaviors, negative behaviors, positive feelings, not so positive feelings, that layability that is in the relationship, right? That mood layability between the two of you, you almost get addicted to that process. And there's a neurological reason for that. The chemical response to the ups and downs in traumatic bonding is oxytocin and dopamine. Now, dopamine has a lot to do with our pleasure and reward center in our brain, and so does oxytocin. So, if things are in the relationship where there's ups and downs and you're addicted to that, then more than likely your brain is responding neurologically and it's hard to get out of it. Right? Your brain has now become addicted to the process that your brain and your heart and your soul goes through in that traumatic bond. There's also a stage of love bonding and criticism, right? The criticism phase is the abusive phase, and the love bombing is the I'm sorry that this happened. I'll never let this happen again. Daddy loves you. Mom loves you. I love you and can't live without you, right? It's that kind of stage, and it's up and down, up and down. There's also a loss of identity. This is the 7th stage, loss of identity. You really lose a piece of who you are. And anytime there's a traumatic bond, it's almost like I'm trying to find the right word for it. It's almost like a coming together of identities, a fusion of identities. That's what I'm looking for. And that fusion of identity is what creates that loss of identity in you, right? Because if you're so traumatically bonded like this, then it's really, really hard to separate and feel like you are individualistic and you are independent. So you lose your personal identity. It's stolen from you. Now, what is traumatic bonding theory? You may be wondering what that is. So let's talk about that a little bit. Traumatic bonding theory says this, that there is a strong emotional attachment and bond built, right? Built in a sense where there is emotions involved, behaviors, and neurology, and the intermittent exchange creates this ball of confusion. Okay. And so it's basically a relationship of good versus evil, or good versus bad. There's psychological violence and there's psychological warfare. I'm going to put it that way. There is also moments of pleasure and moments of horror. You may be surprised at some of the things a person who's abusive will do to you. And there are also ups and downs in terms of the ability to recognize something's wrong here, and the ability to recognize, okay, this is a safe place where I need to be. So in other words, it's really hard sometimes for a person in this trauma bond to step out of it and look and say, okay, is this a safe space, or is this a space where I need to get out? So what happens to you in this whole thing, right? What happens? A lot of people, again, lose their sense of self. It's really difficult when you have a bossy, controlling individual taking over your life. And when they take over your life, you're just standing there, something's been snatched from you, and you're trying to figure out, how do I get it back? So here's what happens to you in this trauma bond. You not only become susceptible to further abuse and manipulation, but you also may struggle with finding your own voice. And when that happens, you fade away into the background and you just become like a maid. So you may find yourself justifying through empathy and shared experience. You may feel like, my mother had a terrible upbringing. She was traumatized by her father who sexually abused her, and so was I. She didn't like her grandmother because the grandmother was an alcoholic and not present, and so do I. I feel lonely every day of my life, and my mother told me that she feels the same way. And so then what happens to you? You start to feel empathy building up in your heart for your mom. And so what do? You become kind of susceptible to further abuse in that trauma bond, because now you feel like you have connected through shared experience and empathy. The other thing is traumatic bonding almost throws you into fight or flight system. It throws you into what's called central nervous system dominance. And when you are in that mode of existence, it's really hard to figure out, which way do I need to go? Do I need to stay in this relationship and deal with it and suffer, or do I need to escape this relationship so I can have the freedom and the health that I've always needed, right? But when your brain is so overwhelmed with stress hormone, cortisol, and your heart is pounding and your soul is hurting, and all you want is for the relationship to work, and that other individual is not allowing that, you can get kind of lost in that fight or flight mode and just completely give up and shut down. You also may self-blame and self-sabotage, right? Maybe there's opportunity for you to get out of this trauma bond, but it may be a little difficult for you to figure out how to do so. So what do? You self-sabotage. You do something that makes it difficult for you to move out of this situation. You also self-blame. It's because of me that this happened. It's because of me that we broke up. It's because of me that I want no contact with my mother. It's because of me that my dad sexually abused me. It makes better sense sometimes to blame yourself than to blame the other person. Because in your mind, there's almost like a cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is this, that I see my individual, your mom, your father, your grandparent, your sibling, your relationship partner, as a good person. And there are some intermittent moments of pure pleasure and happiness. I can't seem to marry that identity with this identity over here that says they are evil, controlling, manipulative, triangulating, and completely callous. They don't care what happens to me. It's hard for me to marry those two. So what am I going to do in my mind? Because it's easier. I'm going to drop the ugly view of this and I'm going to uphold the good view of this for as much as I can. And that means that I'm not going to go anywhere. So I'm going to self-blame because it's all my fault in the first place. The other thing is psychological warfare. If you find yourself really battling what that person has said to you in your mind, and it's hard for you to push some of those thoughts away, you're in psychological warfare. Also in spiritual warfare when it comes to traumatic bonding. It's hard sometimes to take your broken heart and move on. So you stay in the relationship because for your heart and your mind, you may feel like it's too much work to find a better situation. It's too much work to get out of this. So I'm just going to stay right here. There's also what we call cognitive distortions. Those are skewed ways that we look at situations because that's our automatic response to them. So an example of this would be, let's say, for example, your sibling who you're in a trauma bond with because you became the parent of them at a young age, right? Your parents were substance abusers, so you had to be big sister, big brother, and take care of your sibling, okay? So this is your family dynamic. Let's say at 20 years old, your sibling has decided to go out on the streets and do what your parents did, sell drugs, do drugs, the list goes on. Instead of seeing the situation as, this is my brother's choice. He's decided not to go the way I'm trying to take him. The only thing I can do is give him my advice and move on. You tend to self-blame. And so you have what's called a polarized view or a black and white view, right? And it may be something like this. If my brother's a drug addict on the streets, it's my fault. If my brother doesn't find his way and get a good job, it's my fault because I was the one that was supposed to raise him. The reality is that mostly everything in this life is not black or white. There's some gray, right? There's always a but, an if, a what if, right? ... There's never just a black and white reality. The gray part of that reality may be, I've done the best I could in trying to guide my brother, but I have to let him make his own decisions. That's the gray. But instead, the cognitive distortion is black or white. He's failing because of me. So you want to be mindful of that. A traumatic bond entails cognitive distortions. It also entails this dependency or this dependent personality disorder, right? You kind of become dependent on the other individual in that trauma bond because you emotionally and psychologically and spiritually have developed a strong need of them. You kind of get into this mindset of, I'd rather have this traumatic bond because nothing else may be available for me. At least I'm loved. At least he's fighting for me. At least my mom cares about me. And so you kind of throw in this excuse to help yourself engage in what is a very confusing and perplexing psychological reality, right? And so it's easier to say, well, at least I'm fill in the blanks, right? Loved, cared for, paid attention to, spoken for, the list goes on. Check out my videos right here on traumatic bonding from the past. I think you're going to get a lot of information from them. And join me on Fridays and Saturdays, 6 p.m. Eastern time as I talk live. We're going to talk about this topic live. Thank you so much for being with me in today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.